Hey, what is going on today? It is January 18th, 2022, and I am ready to talk about allergies and allergens today. Okay, so we're getting to the point where we've got all the basics, the higher level stuff of the immune system down, and the basic study of allergens really needed for us to go through all the other basic elements of the immune system like B cells, immunoglobulins, IgE, and other things like that. Also, mast cells and their structure and what they do, and all the other things all the other pieces, the building blocks that are needed to understand why an allergic reaction occurs. Okay, so allergens and allergic reactions are interesting to me for some reason. I felt if I became a doctor or something like that, or if I became a medical researcher, then I probably would be, for some reason, gravitating towards allergens. I'm not 100% sure why, but it seems interesting to me. A lot might have to do with the way that venom works and anaphylaxis works, and just the whole mechanism seems pretty interesting. I deign to say cool, but it's interesting. But anyway, so let's understand what happens with allergens. So allergens and reactions to allergens are what's called hypersensitivity reactions. Okay, so if you've ever heard a person is hypersensitive, they're exhibiting a reaction to allergens in one of the class of hypersensitivity reactions of class 1 to 4. Okay, so class 1 is the most prevalent hypersensitivity reaction, and that's the one I'm going to be talking about right now. So what happens? An allergen, which is some sort of particle, and there's many different things that can be termed as an allergens that are not necessarily pathogenic, but they enter your body through your airways or through maybe a bee sting or maybe through some other mechanism, you consuming a peanut or some kind of food which isn't harmful to your digestive system or the rest of your system, but contains it contains macromolecules that your immune system and your white blood cells would for some reason consider as allergens. And these reasons are many times genetic, and they're many times it could be just luck of the draw. But anyway, the allergen enters your system, and the dendritic cells, there's a number of mechanisms for this, but the dendritic cells don't recognize this allergen, and they see it as an antigen, and they will engulf through their standard process the antigen, and present its epitope. And the dendritic cells will travel to your lymph nodes, right, for the standard process of connecting your innate immune system to your adaptive immune system, and thus talking to your T cells, helper T cells, which then talk to your B cells, and then which produce antibodies. So, and also this doesn't have to apparently go directly through the dendritic cells either. This can just, the allergens can be exposed to just B cells floating around in your lymph or wherever they happen to be. So what happens is your B cells, your T cells stimulate once they have the antigen connected to their major histocompatibility complex type 2, MHC2, class 2. They stimulate the B cells to start producing plasma cells, which produce a very specific antibody immunoglobulin E, which is specific to that allergen. So there'd be an IgE for a peanut, or IgE for a pollen grain or something from a specific plant. And these are very specific. Remember, that's how the adaptive immune system works. It's targeted. So the IgE antibodies start to get produced, and these IgE antibodies then circulate through your system, and they interact with your mast cells and your basophils. So why do they interact with your mast cells and basophils? So your mast cells and basophils actually have what's called FC receptors. Okay, so FC receptors, they're specifically designed to link to the bottom region of the antibody, the IgE antibody. These are these Y-shaped things. The top regions are the active sites, the active binding sites for allergens, and then the bottom constant regions are the the heavy chain portions which link to the mast cells. And so these mast cells have a bunch of Y's shaped macromolecules all over their body, right? So what happens is when the mast cells get linked to these antibodies, then through a series of reactions, they start to release histamines. They degranulate, because remember, they contain within their granulocytes, which contain within their granules histamines. And so what histamines do, at this, well, stepping back for a second. So this is called the priming stage of your allergic reaction, right? So now your system is primed and ready to respond. Once this process of immunologically derived allergic reactions has been set into motion, right? Then your body can rapidly respond, because these mast cells now have these antigens linked to their Fc receptors on their surface, and they don't have to wait for the antibodies to be produced by the plasma cells that are specific to those antibodies for that allergen. They now are ready to link to antigen as soon as it appears and start degranulating, right? And so this is a super fast reaction upon second quote infection of that allergen that will occur the next time. So remember, histamine is released from these mast cells and these basophils, as well as a number of other chemicals. And then what happens is histamine will cause vasodilation, right? Histamine and some of the other chemicals will cause your blood vessels to expand, right? And so when that happens, your blood vessels start to and the reason for that is so that it makes travel easier, right? Because your blood vessels have to expand for the purpose of allowing more blood cells to flow to what's effectively a site of infection, okay? And so that's what happens in diagrams like this. And also, so neutrophils and other things start leaking through the blood vessels walls. The process is called extravasation, and remember diapedesis and all those things. And so what happens is the body's blood pressure drops, right? Because when the blood vessels expand, the blood pressure drops, and also because these are connected to mast cells, and which are all over your body, this can be a body-wide reaction, right? So your blood pressure can drop all around your body. Now and also fluid leaks out of your blood vessels, which is essentially edema, right? Swelling, because it leaks into the extracellular space, and then your skin swells up. And so those are the typical signs of an allergy, right? You start to get red face, you guys start to get things like runny nose, rhinitis, I believe, you start to have all sorts of the standard appearances of an allergy, which is coincident with the appearances of an infection. But then at this point, what happens is, if this occurs, remember, this is a positive feedback system, because the mast cells not only release the allergens, release the histamine, they also call other white blood cells. They recruit other white blood cells to essentially get involved in the process, which then cause more and more histamine production. The basophils will degranulate, more mast cells will degranulate as more allergens trigger the antibodies that are linked to the Fc receptors of mast cells, and then there will be just a system-wide, very large-scale increase in your blood vessels, and thus your blood pressure will reduce significantly, causing your tissues to deoxygenate. So that results in what's called anaphylaxis. And anaphylaxis is a potentially very deadly situation in your body, where your system goes into anaphylactic shock, right? Anaphylactic shock is when there's all sorts of symptoms here, right? You have the hives, the itching, the respiratory short of breath. You have dizziness, loss of consciousness, confusion, runny nose, swelling of the conjunctiva. Yeah, essentially everything. A lot of things go wrong with you simultaneously, and at that point, depending on how bad it is, you'll need treatment in order to survive, because your brain will no longer, your tissues will start to die if they can't get oxygen, right? You'll essentially suffocate internally, and at that point, you'll need things like adrenaline and epinephrine to induce vasoconstriction, because epinephrine is a sympathetic drug. It'll cause your blood vessels to constrict, which was the whole problem to begin with, and it will allow your blood pressure to increase, allowing oxygen to start going back to your tissues, which are now deprived. And you'll need adrenaline, and you'll need other things. Essentially, there's ways that people treat people who are undergoing anaphylaxis by restoring their cardiovascular and circulatory systems. So essentially, that's the general scale of what happens with this hypersensitivity type 1 reaction, and how it can elevate to an anaphylactic situation. That's basically it. There's lots of other interesting things here in how, I'm not going to get into them now, but basically how the plasma cells I'm jumping way back, but the plasma cells will differentiate based on interleukin-4 that's emitted from your T helper cells. That's something I want to get into some later, because the interleukins, it's hard to remember, there's mnemonics, but IL-4 is very important to the function and to the progression of the effects of your immune system in general, but also, by consequence, the progression of what happens in an allergic reaction. So anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about today. I'll see you around, and stay cool.